My name is Perry, and my story is messy. So a little bit about my story. So at a young age, I always felt like I was a little different than a lot of boys and kids. I was sensitive and tenderhearted. I wasn't your typical rough and tumbler child. I always thought this was weakness compared to the tough exterior of my dad. But I grew up in a volatile home. My dad was in World War II, served as a medic in the South Pacific, and he served his country well. But he came back with shell shock. So it was always hard to tell what would set Dad off. He was potentially could blow up at any moment. So my dad always vocalized his opinion about others. He would talk freely about what he thought. A lot of times he spoke about races, different races, but the worst people out there for my dad were the queers. So that was the term used back when I was growing up to talk about LGBTQI people. And so that formed a lot of thoughts inside, because little did he know one of his sons that was in his house had that issue and struggled. But I remembered the voice of my dad saying that he could never love a queer. And I really thought that God could not do that either. That there were some people that were too far gone that God didn't want to have anything to do with. I was introduced to sex at a very young age, between the age of 9 and 12. I don't recall the exact age, but someone in authority violated the trust. And that just opened up made me grow up very fast as a child, carrying that weight. I always thought it was my fault, and I wasn't going to tell anybody about that. It was too painful. I was going to hell. It was all my fault. So I never talked to anyone about that. Grew up in a Christian home though, with my mom, and I went to a Christian school for high school. But during the 80s was a very tumultuous time for anyone that struggled with same-sex attraction. When the AIDS epidemic came out, you hear from the pulpit and the parishioners, this is God's judgment. These people are an abomination towards God, and this is their punishment for their behavior. So it bred a lifestyle where I started to hide and pretend. I wasn't going to let anybody know, and I really was praying that God would take all of that away from me, the desires and the thoughts and attractions. But I figured that church is not a safe place. It's not a place to be real. It's a place to put on your mask and come, but the real heavy stuff, you keep it to yourself. But after the 80s, the church became a place to show my pretend self in a lot of ways. I never felt like I was fully authentic, that I was a part of a church, that I could be a part of someone with genuine faith. And so I decided to hide a lot, and keeping secrets is so much easier than telling the truth. When you start with the premise that you're disgusting and there's shame, and you start to learn what the real God is saying, the real Father, and you see the actions of Jesus, it changes your life. So a couple of the truths or the new scripts that I've started to listen to in my life is what God really says about me. So in reading the Bible and doing research, the best and godly way is for me to be abstinent and not to pursue those desires, not to act out on those desires. The sin is not necessarily in the struggle, it's in the sexual activity outside of marriage. So a couple of other truths that I've learned throughout this past year is really that God is my Father. I'm His beloved Son. It's hard to imagine with all those years. He can take our biggest shame and He still loves us. It's pretty amazing.